Imagine setting yourself apart from the competition because your organization is always secure, always available, and always ahead of the curve. That's NetGain Technologies, your total one source for cybersecurity, IT support, and technology planning. Picture picking up the phone and having decades of technology and cybersecurity expertise on the other end, like a bat phone, but with a team of specialists ready to make your business faster, easier, and more profitable. Since 1984, NetGain Technologies has designed, built, and implemented customized technology solutions for businesses of all kinds. They offer a clear roadmap and security plan to keep threats at bay, all at a predictable, affordable monthly cost. NetGain Technologies supports organizations across the United States, providing the benefits of a fully staffed in-house IT department and security team at a fraction of the cost. Get peace of mind. Get competitive. Get NetGain. Contact NetGain today at 844-777-6278 or reach out online at netgainit.com. That's netgainit.com and get ahead of your competition today. Come join us as we go behind the scenes of today's most notorious cybercrime. Every time we get online, we enter their world. So we provide true storytelling to raise awareness, interviewing global leaders making an impact and improving our world. Translating cybersecurity into everyday language that's practical and easy to understand. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast by downloading our episodes on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. Well, good afternoon, gentlemen. We are joined in the studio today with special guest Darren Mott. Darren, thank you so much for joining. I'm really honored to have you here. So, Darren, for people that may not have met you or know about you, tell us kind of a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So prior to joining the FBI, I was a high school teacher in Orlando, Florida, teaching physics and chemistry at the time. And I was finding that I was having more enjoyment sending kids to the principal's office than perhaps necessarily teaching. So perhaps decided maybe a career change was in my future and was kind of looking 30 years down the road. And when I retired from teaching, my only option was really I could do substitute teaching. And that really wasn't very enticing. And my wife had just had a baby. And so one weekend, I was going out rollerblading or something to try and get in shape. And she was like, is this our life? You're going to go rollerblade and I'm going to deal with the kid and we're both going to be teachers. And so I was teaching summer school, ran across the FBI page, said taking applications for special agents. And I'm like, I kind of wanted to do law enforcement. I didn't want to be a state trooper or local police officer. That would be something, I can see the value in being in that position. So I figured I'd throw my application. Worst they could say is no. Not any worse position than I would have been at the time. And I do remember once the other teachers found out I had applied, the head of the math department came up to me and said, hey, I heard you applied to the FBI. I go, yeah, I did. He goes, you're a 30-year-old white guy. Good luck with that.
Exactly. I'm like, I don't see them like recruiting. Where are all the 30-year-old white guys? Like we can't find them.
Where are the white teachers? Right? Where are the 30-year-old teachers that we need?
That's hilarious. But you got in, right?
But yeah, something went right.
Yeah.
Yeah. 13 months after I sent in my first application, I was walking through the doors of the academy in Quantico.
Very cool. Very cool. And so you actually wound up walk us through kind of the
FBI arc.
You wound up as part of this like undercover cyber unit and have some really great experiences.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Some FBI guys do a lot of paper. Some FBI guys are doing really hardcore, like physical crime things. Like, walk us through this.
Well, let me say one thing. We all do paper. Everybody knows
Okay, yeah,
paper.
good point.
That's a requirement for all.
Well,
Exactly. Yeah, so you are not an
Not get
FBI.
away from that one.
Forget see what you're seeing on CBS's FBI shows.
well,
They
I
have
was gonna say, yeah, it's the same thing in law too, because everyone's like, "Oh yeah, you're in the courtroom, you're like screaming at jurors." I'm like, "Yeah, like once or twice a year. The rest of the time, you're like dictating interrogatories, just like reading manuals, like
right.
a lot of dry."
So I've loved computers since I was 11 years old. When I saw my first computer, my mom was a programmer in 1977. She took me in and I played this little
very cool.
Pong-like game on her computer. So I love computers. And when I got in the FBI, I kind of wanted to work computers in some way. I think everybody goes in with an idea of what they want to do. Like, man, I wanted to be a profile or whatever, but I'd read some books and but I wanted to do something with computers. And we've got to remember this was 1999, 2000. There was no cyber division in the FBI. And actually only 16 field offices of 56 had anything even looking like a cyber squad. They weren't even called cyber squads. They were called National Infrastructure Protection Center squads, which I'll be honest with you, when you go to a party and you say you work for the FBI and they say, "Hey, what do you work? Drugs?" You work National Infrastructure Protection Center. Okay, you're not in the FBI.
It's hard to set that up. Yeah,
right, exactly. So, I got onto the newest squad was in Charlotte. So the original case agent for Operation Innocent Images, which was started in 1993, was Doris Gardner. She was an agent out of Baltimore, had an abducted child case, which turned into online child exploitation, and so she bought
big. That's big. I've read about that one. So that actually wound up. It blew up a whole like pedophile ring, right?
Yeah, and actually, it goes on today. Operation Innocent Image still exists. Most field offices have a version or some sort of connection to that, because obviously the problem hasn't gone away. Right. But she was the new cyber supervisor in Charlotte, so they needed people for that squad. And in my class, I was the only one who cared about computers. Everybody else was like, when we would do little computer classes, they were all looking at their watches. When can I get out of here? I'm like, when can I have more of this? This would be great.
Right.
So I got there, and it was a small squad, only 5 agents and her. We didn't have a computer scientist. Had a secretary. We had for lack, it's not the right term, but secretary who did some of the paperwork stuff. Because when you would write the paper in the FBI, you'd give it to her and she would upload it to this antiquated system. But that's a story for another day. And so I ended up I'll just give you the kind of the full 20-year quick arc, and we'll go back to the undercover you wanted to talk about. But so I did that so I worked on that squad for 7 years, went to FBI headquarters, worked in the cyber division and program managed stuff, went and ran a squad in Cleveland, went back to headquarters to integrate the counterintelligence and cyber divisions with a new unit that was designed specifically for counterintelligence and cyber, to kind of find the bad guys behind the keyboards in China, Russia, Iran, wherever. Right. And then ended up ultimately back as a field supervisor in Huntsville, where I ultimately retired. But the case that really what we were here to talk about was one of the, honestly, it's not the first undercover the FBI did in the cyber world, but it was one of the original 10, I guess. Yeah, at the time, because there was not a lot of cyber undercovers going on. Because remember, there was no cyber division. So FBI headquarters didn't know what to do with cyber cases. Who does it belong to? Our cyber cases, you have program manager at FBI headquarters. They're the ones who get you the money. They send reports up so that the executives know what's going on in the field offices. They're kind of your belly button to, leadership in Washington. And so I remember when I first started going down the road with this case, it was originally in the counterterrorism division. Again, they didn't know where to put these things. Right. Every couple of months, I would call my program manager and he said, "Well, I'm not doing that anymore. You got to call this guy in the criminal division." So I'd call that guy in the criminal division. I had to bring him up to speed on the case. And then they'd say, "Okay." 3 months later, I'd call for money. "I don't do that anymore. It's this guy in the counterterrorism division." So that went on for a year when I started this case until the cyber division came along. But the case started, so it was an undercover targeting the wear scene. And this started in the summer of 2001. Essentially, so ICE had a case.
Is this Operation Sudden Urge?
Sudden Urge, yes, Sudden Urge.
Okay. So
yeah, it became Operation Sudden Urge. It wasn't Sudden Urge at the time. At the time when it first started, there was a case out of Chicago, and I don't remember the name, and it wasn't necessarily undercover. It's just they had identified some guys that were engaged in online. All this dealt with online piracy. The where scene is just online piracy, but music, movies, game software, all that stuff. But it was at the time in the early 2000s, according to the Business Software Alliance, the amount of loss to companies was about $6 billion. Now that translates to people's jobs and all that stuff. So people were losing, there's real money lost there. And so the Chicago agents came down and they raided a kid in the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. He was the leader of a group. And so they raided with our help, they raided his dorm room. And it wasn't even, they didn't come to the NIPSI squad, the National Infrastructure Protection Center squad. They went to the criminals, the white collar squad is who did the takedown. And I wasn't even involved in that part of it. And so they ended up arresting that kid. And then the two case agents were leaving to go back to Chicago, but they had like an 8-hour wait until their plane was leaving. And they said, hey, we got this other guy. We didn't have enough information to do a search warrant in his house. Let's just go see if we can find him and talk to him. He was another part of the Where's team, but he was kind of a different, and we'll talk about what he did. But so they go to that house and they knock on the door, and this guy, this little skinny guy comes out, and they show him the badge, and he gets real shaky and scared. And so they sit him down on the porch. They're talking to him for about 15 minutes, and I don't think he peed his pants, but he probably was pretty close. So they're talking to him, and he looks confused. And another guy comes to the door and goes, "Hey, are you looking for?" And he says the name of the username. I'm not going to say that here because it would give up my source. But so they said, "I think you're looking for me." And so they were talking to his roommate. So they brought him out, and he brought him inside. He showed him like all the communications he was having with all of these different groups. He had access to multiple groups. And most of the cases up to this point that ICE was doing, and a little bit the FBI was doing, were singular groups. So singular where's related groups. He had access to many of them because he had become interested in what it was they were doing, and he ingratiated himself into all of them. So he had tentacles in all these groups. And he said, I'll help you find these guys. Because he had a legitimate job. He didn't want to go to jail. Right. And they weren't looking to arrest him, but he found that would be
of interest, right? He was a person like they don't know whether he's going to be a target or whether he's going to be a very useful informant. So,
but keep in mind, this is the white. So that they said they bring him back to the FBI office in Charlotte to the white collar squad and say, hey, we've got this guy. He's with these groups. You might want to use him. Mm-hmm. And now one of the things, if you're an agent and if you're a new agent, it's you want sources. Sources is the bread and butter for all agents. But the white collar guy's like, I don't know what to do with this guy. He had no. So I was involved in some of the meetings with him when he would come in, and then they ultimately said, I can't do anything with this. Do you guys want him? And I said, sure, I'll take him. So I started talking to him in the late summer of 2001 about what we could do from an undercover perspective. How could we create an environment that would allow us to gather evidence to, take down these groups? Because it's all enterprise investigation. Start and find out how the group is organized and try to dismantle it, just like organized crime.
Because this was really serious back in the day too, because the theft, the piracy that was going on was massive. Like people were like companies were closing. The bigger companies were losing billions of dollars, like you mentioned. And then, this is also at the time, you remember people were pirating the DirecTV satellite boxes. Like all of that was going on. And there was a lot of there was a whole connection there to some really dark, deep-seated, rogue nations and black hat hackers and things like that. It's so you were like tapping right into it, weren't you?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Everyone, did you ever want to ask us a question directly or communicate, give us feedback, make suggestions, whatever it is, you can now do that direct. There's a link in the show notes right at the top where you can text us directly, come communicate with us right here in the podcast studio, or you can text the number 904-867-4466 and text the number 201-4652 and leave your message. That is 904-867-4466 or text the number 204-4652 and leave your message. We look forward to talking to you soon.
Right. And keep in mind that the like law enforcement federally, I mean, state-wise don't do anything with cyber, but federally they didn't know really how to deal with it. And prosecutors didn't know how they were supposed to prosecute.
Yeah, exactly.
If you could get attribution and find them, because they were using encrypted and private IRC channels, internet relay chat. I'm sure the three of us are old enough to remember that, but most people, you're 30 or more, like, what the hell is that IRC? I don't know what that is.
Well, that's how Mafia Boy got connected with the Russian hacker gang at age 15 from his bedroom, right?
Yep.
It's crazy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So we organized, we designed a way, him and I, to say, okay, let's create our own, because what the whole thing with this scene was, where do they store archival material? Right. Because at the time it had a weird, if you look at the mafia, they have this weird system of respect amongst the different families, I guess. I didn't work on it. I'm guessing that's how that worked. Same thing here. If you released the original pirated version of Windows ME, let's say, for example, if you were so inclined, that copy was the same copy that everybody had, because no other group would release it. That would be a big no. Do not take our stuff and re-release it as your own. So
it's like going on the turf, right? Like this is
right, exactly. It was all who's first, who's the first to release it. That's what gave you your creds and gave you your bona fides and gave you access to all these other groups and all these other servers to do all this stuff. And none of them did it for money. It was all just for the piracy, which is the hard thing people can't wrap their heads around. Why would you even go after these guys if they're not doing it for financial gain? And I would have to argue, well, they're not gaining, but people are losing.
Right.
So, it's still a crime. Still a crime at the time. The federal government is still trying to figure out cyber priorities. China and Russia hacking private companies like we see now was not a big thing. China kind of hit bigger a couple years later when Titan Rain came around, but at the time they're trying to figure out priorities. And obviously innocent images type tough, the crimes against children was still at the top of the heap. And then you start to have the Mafia Boy stuff, the botnets and the intrusions, but wares became a big thing. And so we developed an undercover strategy, what we wanted to do. And as we were starting to write it up, 9/11 hits in 2001. So that goes on a pause because everybody's working terrorism now.
Yep.
And then we ended up getting approval to start the undercover, which basically dealt with us being a storage site for these groups. We would create the infrastructure for them to store their material, which basically means they would send us their evidence of their illegal doings, which was great. But on the date that we got it signed for approval was the same date that ICE conducted what was called Operation Buccaneer, which at the time was the biggest cyber takedown of any group. It was a wares group called Death or Die or something like D&D or something to that line. And it was, they did it in a bunch of different countries, but it was a one hitter. They did it and they were done and they were gone. And the nice thing for us, keep in mind, we're creating this archival system that no one knows about now. And ICE just took down a group. So everybody's scattered to the winds and they're trying to now recoup and reorganize. And we're hitting it right at the same time that they're looking for new places to go to hide their material.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and so they just clustered right on you guys about
it's the groups that had access to my source, that my source had access to.
Right.
Because he had built his way into the hierarchy of these groups. He was a capo, I guess is the best way to put it. And so he had access to them and he said, hey, here's what we're doing. We're going to have this site. It's going to be stored and everything's going to be in Canada. So the US can't get to you. And we're going to have a high speed access. And because we ended up getting a T3 line into
which is really fast back in the day.
At the time, it was fast at the time. Right? Fast at the time. It cost me $7,700 a month for that line.
Wow.
AT&T put a big rack in the Charlotte field office. I don't think, it's gone. They're not in that same building anymore, but it sat there for a long time because I had a part of it in this back. I had like a back closet that I set up, basically built my own server farm with. So we had a base server, which was at the time, the first one I built was 1 terabyte. So it was a 1 terabyte server farm. And this is 2002 is when I'm starting to build all this stuff. 1 terabyte storage at the time ended up being 20, 50 gig drives because that's the biggest drive I
That's the
could
biggest
find.
you
at the
could get.
time. The biggest I could get.
Ridiculous.
So
And
I had
now
to
you
put
can
out-
buy them at Best Buy for like $60
Right.
for like this big.
Well, I have a 50 gig thumb drive. It's about bigger than my fingernail, but whatever. At the time, it is what it's technology. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So we built that, but we, in addition to building the server farm, we had 3 mirrors. So I created 3 Linux boxes that all connected to that same server, but had different information on it, so that Group A could log into mirror 1 and Group B into mirror 2. So it looked like they had their own infrastructure. When in the end, they were all kind of feeding into the same storage. But that's what kind of brought them to us, that we started down.
Them to think that this was all in Canada, right?
Correct. Yep. And the way I got around that was I ultimately, so AT&T, they just trusted it was. No one checked for the first year that we were really in Canada. And within a year, I had moved out of the FBI office because the space I was in was so confined and didn't have air conditioning. It was getting too hot. So I was burning out. I was burning out stuff because I built everything from scratch. I didn't go buy Dell servers. I went to this local computer shop that loved me because I would walk in and buy $10,000 worth of computer equipment to build my own servers and put them all together, the CPU and the hard drive and the graphics board and all that stuff. And they knew me. It was kind of a funny story because they knew me as, I take that back. The company knew me as my name was John Ryan, is my undercover name. John Ryan. And so, John Ryan. John Ryan. Yeah, nice, my middle name. It should have been Darren Ryan. I didn't know. This was the whole thing with, at the time in the cyber world with undercovers, no one knew what we were doing. My undercover name should not have been John. It should have been Darren, because all undercovers first name and a fictitious last. So if someone says, "Hey, Darren," you'll turn your head. And you turn right. So that's the reason. But again, no one was telling me what to do. I was kind of winging it, and people were like, "Yeah, that's fine. Go do that. We don't care." And so they knew me as John Ryan, who just bought a lot of equipment. And then ultimately, one of the ladies I dealt with all the time, I had to kind of take her in the back and say, "Look, I'm an FBI agent. I'm buying this stuff for whatever," because I needed her to know that, because there were certain things that, like, why is this person buying all this stuff? Mm-hmm. So I was able to create that relationship so I could buy it undercover at this little store and built it all together. And the funny thing, you mentioned the code name. This is another issue where we didn't know what we were doing. We were just kind of winging it. Is the name Sudden Urge? Stupid name, means nothing, has nothing to do with anything. But when you want a code name in the FBI, there's 2 ways you can do it. Come up with your own and get approval, or you go to this unit that sends you a list of 5 names that is created off of this computer that they know has not been used. So every code name goes into a computer, so they don't reuse the same code name. Right. But no one told me that. No one told me to do that. They just said, call this unit. They'll give you 5 names. You pick one. Like, all right. And of the 5, Sudden Urge was the best, if that tells you what my options were. So I said, that one doesn't sound stupid, I guess. I'll go, as opposed to someone could have just said, pick your own, they'll approve it or not approve it. Right. But anyway, that was a learning experience for them. But then the other thing is I was a case agent. For most undercovers, you have a case agent who does the administrative, or actually oversees the case. It's the strategic agent. You have the administrative agent who does most of the paperwork. You have a financial person to help you. You have an agent that manages the sources, and that's kind of your team. Mm-hmm. I was all of those things. I did all of those because it's the first time. Well, not the first time, but this is, one of the first originating undercovers at the time. And we just didn't have a cyber division, counterterrorism division, criminal division, didn't know how to do cyber at all. Didn't really care. Like, whatever. There was no online undercover school at the time. There was an undercover school. There'd been one for a long time to deal with real undercover agents, but I was never going to see these guys in person. It was all online stuff. So it was very easy for me to say, well, I'm not going to have a face-to-face. So I don't meet the criteria for being undercover certified, fully undercover certified. So like, yeah, you're right. You're not going to. So we'll make an exception. If your special agent in charge signs off and says and approves it, we're all good with it. Everybody was good with it. Can't do it anymore. It's a little different now. You have to go through a class for a month, for a week, and some other stuff. But at the time, it was like, yeah, go ahead. It's all good. So that's
so the targets, the guys that were actually doing the crimes, where were they located?
Everywhere.
So
Yeah,
other
I mean,
countries, Russia,
domestically,
Russia,
internationally.
Europe, domestic, international, the whole thing.
Not a lot of Russia because no one spoke Russian. So the Russians had their own groups. We weren't in there because we were in the English speaking groups. But it included Israel, Germany, Canada, Great Britain, France, Belgium, Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Those areas all had group members because most of them could speak English in some way, shape, or form. And plus, there was plenty of American guys that were doing it at the time because the risk was low at the time. Now, Buccaneer kind of changed that a little bit, made them think a little differently. But they figured as long as we store our information outside the U.S., they're never going to get evidence on us. That was the whole goal. And I ultimately moved to a Time Warner facility. They had this little metal warehouse about 30 miles from the FBI office. And I was able to go there and get a fiber line at 1.5 megabits per second, which it was smoking at the time. At that time in 2002, it was awesome. And that only cost me the facility and the connection was $1,500 a month. So I went from $7,000 to $1,500. So I'm saving the government all sorts of money. They're loving it. Like, that's great. Go ahead and use that. But I basically I called it the Bat Cave because it's where if Darren was in the office, he must be at the Bat Cave doing whatever he does down there with that stuff. So, and it had air conditioning and all that kind of jazz.
So you've set up this like clandestine server farm, right?
Correct.
And then you're undercover. And then do you have other like informants involved, or how
I just have one source. The one source, the one guy who came to the door and said, "You're looking for me." Yep, wow. He was a kid. He was mid-20s. He worked for a fairly large.
He had a legit job. That he wanted to go to jail for. Okay, so
IT security for a fairly large corporation in Charlotte.
Wow. Okay.
So he was helping me. In addition to the server farm, we had communications systems set up to monitor the internet relay chat channels because we were on about 7 or 8 of them because all the groups had their own channels.
Right.
So we monitored them from there, and he monitored them from his house. So he would keep them up all the time at his house because he had a little setup at his house. Mm-hmm. And then every once a month, he would bring me a disc with all of his communications, and I would keep a disc of all mine that I would do at the Batcave.
Cool. So then what happens after you get this all set up? It
goes on for a while. So it started in 2001, and I ultimately had 15 terabytes worth of server space. I had man-made racks all over the place, and the problem was they kept having communication issues amongst themselves. So I would get calls on the weekend from him saying, "Hey, mirror 1 is down." So I have to drive 40 miles down to reset server 1. At one time, the FBI had put motion sensors and other stuff for security purposes in this facility. And so the motion sensor went off. I go, that's not good. So I drive down there with my lights and sirens going to get to this place. I turned them off about a mile before I got to it. A bird had flown in and was flying around the inside and hit up the motion detector. So all these kinds of issues. But these guys started just loading stuff into us. They just started sending us every time they would create a release, they would send an archival copy to us. They stored all of the tools they use for breaking decryption and DCMA requirements. They kept all the tools on there. And for the most part, they logged in directly from their homes or from their work. We had a couple of guys that worked for universities that were doing it through the university. So they were using the university bandwidth to do everything. That one guy was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I remember he was one of the first guys that we identified and ended up having a little chat.
And these were things that were otherwise copywritten, right? Like movies, music, tons of stuff. Like,
well, the best thing is I had to evaluate evidence. So I watched a lot of movies I probably wouldn't have seen otherwise. Microsoft and Sony both sent me a modified Xbox and a modified PlayStation to test the stuff. So they would put, a game up. I would download it, burn it onto a disc, throw it in this modified Xbox, and it would play. So that's how I would confirm that it was legitimate material. Same thing. I mean, movies you could watch them, music you could listen. The one thing we didn't do was pornography. There was plenty of it, but if you put pornography on our system, we kicked you out of the group or kicked you out of the access because that was a no-go there, obviously. So we had to restrict that kind of stuff. But books, a lot of software, every conceivable piece of software was there somewhere. There was a $600,000 piece of software that dealt with like an X-ray machine. So it was the associated software with that machine. I don't know why it didn't come with the machine. I assume it did, but if you needed to buy another version, there was a retail version of this particular piece of software. So that made it very easy to get the charges ramped up on these guys. It was all based on retail value of what it was they were pirating. And we didn't really put money value on the movies, music, movies or music. But the games and the software, we said, okay, this guy uploaded or downloaded 10 versions of this. So if it was that medical software, he was easily at the $6 million loss range by his movement.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So that made it very painful for them very quickly. Plus, all the log files showed it. But the issue was I had tons of log files. Couldn't go through them line by line. We had to bring a couple guys down from FBI headquarters who were in the operational technology division to code like a big Google search engine within my network so that I could Google search, actually within a separate network, but Google search, I'd input all this data and then search by username. And then it would list out everything this guy uploaded or downloaded. And then I could go through and figure out what it was. And the problem was these were not one-shot files. These were RAR files. So if you had figure a CD is 750 meg, right?
Yeah.
So, but you could only compress it into 10 meg sizes. So you'd have 75 RAR files for one thing. Whoa. Or, lots of RAR. So I had to go through all these RAR files, make sure they're all there. It's okay. That is one full version of this item. So that was the hardest part, was collating the evidence and then identifying who we're targeting. Because we wanted leaders. There's a lot of people there are a lot of leechers that were part of the group, but they didn't really do anything. They didn't crack it. They didn't run the group. They didn't distribute. So those were the three things. If you led the group, you were part of the cracking group, or you were a distributor of some way, shape, or form. Those were the three main areas we looked for. And if you were that person, then we looked for evidence for you for that, and then figured out where you lived domestically. The first round of takedowns, we did everything domestically. So we identified the leaders, crackers, distributors, and then basically built dossiers on all of them, who they are, where, and then I'd identify the username. That's all I knew. Username, IP address. So I had to subpoena the IP addresses to say, okay, who does this belong to? And then wait for that process to go through while I'm educating the lawyers. Say, here's what we're trying to do. So, you send out subpoenas, you have to wait for the subpoenas to come back. And so that's why from December 2001 to June of 2004 is when we actually did the first round of, my case had 2 rounds of takedowns. The first one was then, and it became what was called Operation Fastlink was the first one. And it was not just my case, but there were 2 other cases that were part of this out of, actually 3 other cases out of New Haven, Washington, and I'll be honest, I don't remember the 4th one. I think it was in California somewhere, but they all had Wares cases as well, or certain versions, but they all had singular groups. I had 5 groups I was targeting at the time, but I had access to more than 5, but we focused on 5. They were all singular group entities. The one in Washington had to do with music. Their victim was RIAA.
Oh, okay. RIAA. Yeah. That was huge.
They were the specific victim in their case. In New Haven, he had a source as well. And they were on largely software. And I think the one in California, I want to say that one was movie related, because it was probably out of LA with Hollywood stuff. So
correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read, the takedown was pretty massive though. It was 20 US cities, 7 different countries. There were you guys went down.
Right. So for Fastlink, for my part, was 20 cities domestically. I had 20 targets. New Haven had several. Washington had several, and the one in California had several. So in addition to mine, there were some other ones. There were a couple international. I think my international ones occurred the next year, but for Fastlink, mine were all domestic. Largely
the first wave of
first wave.
Correct. So after that takedown, what happened in the takedown?
Keep in mind, so as soon as the first search warrant happened, it it flew because we had internet relay chat up watching it because we knew that it was going to be. And my source calls me and says, "Oh, it's crazy out here. They are all freaking out. They're all dropping their access. They're shutting down their internet relay chat channels." But we knew they'd come back. So everybody starts scattering to the winds because everybody's now getting busted and it's being hazed. FBI came to my door. It's kind of hard to hide that in this particular scene. And so we did all that. It's the largest takedown at the time. There were terabytes and terabytes of data collected, tons of computers. And so what happened so they all scattered, and that basically ended the cases in the other 3 field offices. But my source didn't get burned. Now, a couple of guys thought my source was the source of all this issue, but he was able to kind of deflect it. And there were plenty of other guys that trusted him that said, "Nah, it can't be him. Not him. Don't believe you. It's not him." So he's like, "We can keep this going for another year." So I had the attorney from DOJ was sitting with me. I go, "We can keep this going for another year if you guys want." He goes, "Sure, let's go ahead. Let's do that. And let's see what else we can get." So we took down 3 main groups. Mage, I think, was one, and Risk ISO, and couple ones that had ISO at the end. And so we targeted 4 or 5 that we didn't have access to the first time around. So we just targeted these new groups because now they're now looking because for a lot of them, their stuff was taken down. So a lot of where the servers were now gone, we're like, "Hey, our server's still up and going. You can come to us. We've proven that we can be secure because no one got us because we're in Canada." But now, so keep in mind, so Buccaneer had happened. Now this happens. And they are now they're now getting a little antsy about anybody. And so we said, "We're in Canada, do a trace route. The last 3 hops are going to drop on you." And sure enough, you'd get to Atlanta, and there were 3 hops from Atlanta to Charlotte, but we had Time Warner was able to redact it. So it was just ... And we said, "That's our VPN going to our server farm in Toronto." And they're like, "Sounds good to us."
Wow.
Where do we sign up? So I ultimately had 15 terabytes worth of stuff. Ultimately, if I went another year, got more server space, targeted more people, and then this time around, let's go international on this one. So we targeted individuals in 7 countries. If you asked me to rattle off all 7, I could probably get most of them. I don't know if I remember them all. I don't have access to the case file anymore, but they all got. The funniest one was the German one because the German guy was using the free Wi-Fi of his neighbor. So they end up busting in the neighbor's door.
Wow.
And this old couple in Germany, we don't know what you're talking about. So, but they found him 2 days later. He was using somebody else's free Wi-Fi, but they were able to track him. And he was the leader of one of the groups. His name was Dark Wolf was his name. I remember him. I remember that one. And there's another guy named Butcher who was the leader of a group. He was out of Texas somewhere. Jimmy Nugent was his real name. I mean, there's certain names you just remember who they were because of the communications with them. And
all in all, how many guys were taken down?
On my case, about 40, 40-ish.
What?
But here's the problem. Here's the problem. So internationally, I don't know what they did with them internationally. I kind of lost track of that afterwards. I went to go to the headquarters about 2 years later when we're still going through a bunch of the prosecutions for the first round. But the laws, both the judges and the DOJ didn't really know how to charge these guys. So they charged them all with conspiracy. That's the only charge they charged them with because easier because you can get them to plead to that. They all pled. No one said, "I didn't do this. I'm going to trial." They all said they all
Rico. Or was it Rico?
I tried Rico. They no way they were going for Rico. Rico is special for mafia. So they weren't going to go because there is a predicate. The distribution of copyrighted material is a predicate for Rico. It is in there. I'd researched that we can do Rico. We're not doing Rico on this. And again, it goes back to at the time in the early 2000s, the cyber laws just don't match up to the crime. They don't see the crime because it's not. You can't you can see murder, you can see abuse of a child, you can't see intellectual property theft from music and movies and software.
Well, and we talk about this a lot, Darren, and it's because back then, we had 2 versions of our lives. We had our physical world, right? And then we had almost this second version of it, right? Which was this digital world. Today, we've all transformed. We've all done this digital transformation to such a degree that this is our life. It is tied to it, right? And so the laws have kind of stepped up to kind of match it. And it's kind of interesting how now You have to be a better corporate citizen. You have to be a better citizen when you get online, and you have to realize that it's a much more dangerous world.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We are proud to be sponsored by Kiteworks, a secure content platform for CMMC compliance. Kiteworks is FedRAMP moderate authorized and helps accelerate your path to CMMC 2.0 compliance. Did you know Kiteworks puts defense contractors on the fastest path to meeting CMMC 2.0 requirements, leveraging the same zero trust framework guidance used for federal requirements? Kiteworks supports nearly 90% of the security requirements for CMMC 2.0 level 3. This can drastically reduce the effort and costs associated with obtaining CMMC 2.0 authorization. What's really cool to us is Kiteworks has an ongoing bounty program and regular penetration testing to minimize vulnerabilities along with one-click appliance updates. Kiteworks provides unparalleled ease of use with its intuitive web UI, mobile apps, and even Outlook integration. This user-friendly experience avoids productivity disruptions during your CMMC 2.0 implementation. Accelerate your CMMC 2.0 compliance and address federal zero trust requirements with Kiteworks' universal, secure file sharing platform made for defense contractors. Visit kiteworks.com to get started. That's kiteworks.com to get started today.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, one thing I always say is criminals are always way ahead of law enforcement, because now if you wanted to target the wear scene, all you're going to get are the leechers, the people that are just downloading it for free. You're not going to get the guys distributing it, because now the whole thing where if I release this, no one else can, that's no longer, that doesn't stand. Everybody, you can still download movies, music, game, software. It hasn't stopped anything. Right. BitTorrent makes it much easier, and VPNs, you hide your material, you can hide where you're going, hide what you're doing. It's very hard to do it, and it's not a priority anymore. They don't. You'll occasionally see a couple people arrested for it, but they're like the big end. They have big servers in their house where they're just distributing out everything, and they don't care. So that you can accumulate time against that. But if you're just you're going and downloading Top Gun Maverick, and that's all you do, no one's coming to your door.
Nobody's going to knock on your door for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the development of SaaS programs too has really changed that too, because now, I mean, people don't get the discs anymore, right? Like maybe because it's become SaaS that it's just less prevalent.
And it's so easy to copy now, because movie comes out on Amazon Prime. There are all sorts of free tools, because the criminals know how to do it, that you can immediately snip it, copy it, and distribute it. It's still all out there, easy to find.
Yeah. So, holy cow, that was so. What happened at the end? Like, did you?
Yeah. So, like I said, so most of them pled guilty. At least the ones in the U.S. pled guilty to conspiracy, and for the majority of them, they got 1 year and 1 day. That was most of their sentence, unless there was a couple that worked with the Bureau on other cases. There was a case out of GasLink he was in Chicago, and he ended up flipping and becoming a source for the Chicago case, which was called Operation Jolly Roger, which ultimately was part of Takedown.
Got it. And what was Takedown?
It was like FastLink. It was the same thing. It was a major case so instead of, what happened is, the reason they put all these together, because if I said, look, I'm going to go arrest these 20 people, I would have screwed up the other cases, because all of their guys would have then moved to other infrastructure, and they'd have lost all sorts of contacts. So we kind of coordinated all at the same time, because one of the big issues with most judges was when you said, here's the IP address and here's who it belongs to. If you've done that a year ago, they're going to say, that's not fresh enough. I need something. So you had to do another round of subpoenas for IP addresses within a month or two of actual searching their house or going to their house. So we all had to do that. All the cases had to do that at the same time. So we kind of could all coordinate. So we picked the date. Everybody, all the case agents and all of the offices involved ended up at headquarters in what's called the SIOC, the Strategic Information Operations Center. There's a big conference room there. We all sat in there and we all briefed our cases and gave information packets to all the agents who were going to be involved with dealing with that. And so, yeah, so that's why we had to do it together. So a year later is when we did the second round, and I've already lost track of what I'm getting old. Where were we talking about when I started down that road? I started down that road for a reason. I can't remember what the reason was anymore.
I was asking my Operation Takedown because I was curious. Is that like was that the takedown of the guys that were doing all those DNS attacks, knocking down all? No.
So Takedown was like Fastlink. So Takedown. Right. So in my case, I went for another year. So I gathered evidence for another 20 people. Plus Chicago and San Jose now had cases. Chicago had a case similar to mine. San Jose had a very specific movie group, a group that was doing movies. And so they had MPAA as their victim that was helping them.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And there was called Operation Copycat was the name of their particular case.
Oh, that was a cool name.
Yeah. They came up with it. Oh, they didn't go ask the stupid computer, what should we call this? So we did the same thing. All three offices, okay, what's the date we're going to do this? So we did it in July of 2005. We'll do a big takedown. We'll do it just like we did last year. And we had the same kind of success. And the funny thing was that the original name was not Takedown. So myself and Shane Barry was the case agent in New Haven for higher education. And he went to be a headquarters supervisor. And so him and I said, how about we use dev null? Because when things go away and you can't get to them, it's dev null, right? Right, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I like that.
He goes up to the people who can approve these kind of major case names and like, we have no idea what that means. You can't use that name. So hence Takedown is what it ended up being, which is still, it's an okay name.
So today, I mean, obviously the FBI has a much more robust and dedicated, actually different divisions solely dedicated to certain types of cyber crimes.
Well, it's one division. One division, the cyber division, but there's multiple sections that deal with different parts. Yeah, correct. Mm-hmm.
And so some focus on certain types of crimes that are happening online. Mm-hmm. Some focus on others. One thing that always is clients talk to us about it all the time, and it's something that is it's one of the issues, right? Clients are always hesitant about contacting law enforcement, right? And I don't know if it has to do with that's the realization or the acceptance of accountability that this is a massive data breach, right? Because they're worried about their brand, they're worried about their reputation, they're worried about their jobs, their families, etc. What do we tell them today? Because they have to. If they don't do that, we're not, like when it first happens, if they would make it known, other people can adjust and change so that it doesn't happen 5 or 6 or 50 times, right? So it's better for the community that awareness occurs. But what are your thoughts on that? What
that's a great question. And I did hundreds of thousands of presentations. I continue to do those presentations today, talking about what the FBI can do. And that question comes up a lot. When do we contact the FBI? Why should we contact the FBI?
Right.
Well, think about it in a couple of different ways. First one is, if you have a problem, isn't it better to know who your FBI point of contact is before you have the problem rather than when the problem exists? So before you have a problem, reach out to the FBI, say, look, I need to understand in our community here, wherever we are, if we're in Texas, LA, Alabama, wherever, what's the threat here? Now, in most cases, from a cyber perspective, it's going to be business email compromise, ransomware, all the stuff we talk about.
Right.
But at least then you know who the local contact is. So when you have that problem, you can call and say, hey, here's my issue. What do I do? Because with business email compromise, as a perfect example, if you're a victim of business email compromise, if you can contact the FBI within 24 hours to 48 hours, somewhere in that time frame, there's what's called the business email compromise kill chain. They might be able to get your money back. After 48 hours, it's hit or miss.
That's something I guarantee most listeners and most business owners and most executives at organizations don't even know.
Right. It's an 80.
Because that's a great point. Like, are you going to wait until somebody in your administration accidentally wire transfers $120,000 for the first time you're going to contact law enforcement? Like, that's going to be the first time? Or do you want to reach out ahead of time and say, hey, in case something like this happens, what should we do? Here's our plan. Here's what we think we should do. But does this make sense, or who should we contact? And then, if something happens, you've already talked to them. You've got the bat phone. You're able to call them right away. And like what you just said is really impactful. Like, if we can call it right away, we might not even lose the money, which is a great result.
And think of it from an intelligence perspective as well. And I don't mean just intelligence for the FBI, but intelligence for business sector. So let's say business sector A is targeted, let's say healthcare. So let's say healthcare, there's an attack against a certain model of MRI machine. All right. Just picking a product.
Right.
And because of that, the hospital gets hit with ransomware. At this day and age, I would say if you're a victim of a cyber incident, your brand's not going to suffer because everybody's a victim of a cyber incident. So it's really brand issues, not that big a deal. Now, unless you're a cybersecurity company and you get breached, you may have a problem then. I get that. But if you're healthcare, banks, everybody knows this stuff is happening. So going back to my healthcare issue, if MRI machine gets hit and ransomware, boom, the information that can be gathered by a forensic examination of that incident can be useful for dissemination to other healthcare organizations that have that same MRI machine that can now not become a victim of that. So you're helping others within your industry through that collaboration with the FBI. Now, you may be able to do it with third parties like Mandy and CrowdStrike, who will release their own intelligence reports if they're your third party incident responder. Fine, whatever. I don't care. Call them if you want to pay. If you want to pay the money, or you want to have the FBI try to help you for free. It doesn't really matter. But I mean, I'll give you one example of, knowing your FBI person beforehand. When I was still with the Bureau, I had a CIO call me and say, I'm just calling to check and see if Agent Smith is one of your agents, because he called me and said there might be somebody putting ransomware on my network. I'm just verifying he is who he is. Good due diligence. If you don't know who your FBI folks is, but you know someone who's in the FBI, you can confirm it. And this CIO was engaged to another CIO who knew me personally and he said, call Darren, he'll tell you. So I said, yep, he is an agent on our cyber squad. If he's got information, you may want to listen to it. Nothing happened. He wasn't called back. The supervisor of the cyber squad emails the CIO and say, look, we have intelligence that there is a bad actor group putting malware on your system. It will induce ransomware. We don't know when, but here are the file names that you can remove from your system so you don't have this incident. Didn't believe him either.
Wow.
Instead, decided they would email the special agent in charge of the FBI office in Birmingham to verify all three of us were who we said we were. Now, the bad guys were in the system downloading files. Do you think they had access to the email? They certainly did, because they saw that email go to SAC Birmingham saying, who is this person? She shows up the next morning, whole system locked up with ransomware.
I was just going to say, they're just going to launch it right there. Like right there. And then as soon as they see you questioning it, they're just going to launch it right then.
Right.
People don't realize how long criminal adversaries, hackers are in a system before you realize it. Like before you detect it. Yep. People always think, it just happens. I click on it and boom, the whole thing happens. I'm like, no. Right. You click on it and nothing happens. Right. 6 months later, after they're watching your emails, everything, that's when they decide to launch the attack.
If you're lucky, it's only 6 months.
Right. It's exactly right.
Yeah. That's the average.
Yeah.
The average is 306 days. This last stat I saw, and who knows, it could be long, but SolarWinds, we're in there for a year.
I know. And they're reading everything. They're moving laterally. They're going up. They're checking everything out. Mm-hmm. Holy cow. What, man. So I think that's great advice about reaching out, taking your incident remediation plan, your incident response plan, your idea, the fact that you don't have a plan, whatever it is, and reaching out to federal law enforcement before something bad happens. Yep. Because at the end of the day, while brands may not be destroyed because everybody gets breached, not all breaches are equal, right? Like there's bad breaches that destroy brands. And then there's some breaches that are like, okay, you got some usernames. We'll give everybody free monitoring and everybody changes their password and everybody moves along. Yeah, we lost a little money, but there's a huge swath of gray area in between those. And so by reaching out ahead of time, it can really cause one to not be that bad. What else can we tell people? What else would you say
Well, so everybody fears that when they have a data breach, they call the FBI is going to come swooping in the blue jackets with the yellow lettering,
rappel on ropes.
Yep.
Come on down with the sunglasses.
You're going to take every computer available, and we'll be down for 6 months until they gather their evidence. Yeah. Now, look, if you have an insider that hacked your system and stole your IP, yeah, we're going to take that one computer, the main computer that probably was where he launched his attack, and we're going to do a forensic examination of that one. You're probably not going to get that one back for a while. But if you're a victim, the last thing the FBI is looking to do is re-victimize you or continue to victimize you. They will try to.
That's good advice.
They will try to, in as least an intrusive way possible, get the intelligence that they need to, figure out maybe, ideally, the ideal thing is to find the bad guy and put them in jail. But let's be honest. I think Scott Oggenbaum told you this when he was on the same podcast.
I'm familiar with the four truths.
Nobody's going to jail and probably no one's getting arrested and you're probably not getting your money back.
Yep.
But you may find some success. And if that does happen, like, especially if it's an insider, insiders will get caught because they're domestic. So there's a good chance that evidence can help solve your problem. Now, if China gets in your network, no one's going to jail for that. Russia's in your network. People say, how do I know who got in my network? Well, it's hard to say. Attribution's hard. But here's one way you can tell. So think of the room you're in as your network in your facility. If you come in tomorrow and everything in that room is gone, China was there. If you come in tomorrow and the pen on your desk is gone, Russia was there. And if you come in tomorrow, it's on fire, Iran was there. So that's how you know.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I've heard that before. I think I've heard you say that before. And it's hilarious. That's so funny. If one pen is missing, that was the Russians.
Right.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh. What are some of the biggest?
It says Hillary was here. You got to say both. It's both things.
Well, what are some of the biggest? Right. Like what are some of the biggest threats facing people today? I mean, clearly ransomware, etc. But to me, it's just social engineering. It's the tactic that is the most persuasive of
right. So I always start off every presentation with defining risk. Threats times vulnerabilities defines your risk. So threats are who the actors are doing the bad things. Vulnerability is what they use to get into it. So from a threat perspective, my argument is nation state actors are far more problematic than criminal actors. Criminal actors are very singularly focused on data they can monetize. Right. All right. And if it's too hard to get to it, they're just going to go to the next place.
Right.
Nation state actors, if they want your information, they get your information. They are persistent for a reason. And they will look for those ways to get in. But social engineering, phishing is 90% of success comes from that because someone always clicks the link every time. They don't have to do the hard SQL injections and all that. They still can. They still will if they can. Maybe if you have a vulnerable server facing the internet and they can immediately do a SQL injection, they're certainly going to do that because then they don't have to deal about someone opening a link. But the other thing to think about is beyond the cyber part is the human piece. They can come at you from a human nation state, mind you, not criminal so much, but nation state guys will send humans to you to try to get into your networks that way. The FBI actually will give away, it's probably on YouTube now, a case called The Company Man, which had to do with China trying to steal the intellectual property of an insulation company in the Midwest, based on a true story. So they tried they tried to recruit an engineer to get the intellectual property of this particular insulation company. And it had to do with, there was a big fire in China that killed 57 people because the insulation in the building was poor. So the Chinese government said, if you can come up with this level of insulation, we will give you a $3 billion contract, something like that. That's what led to that. They had actually gone in to talk to the company about doing business with them, these two Chinese guys. One of the guys said, hey, I need to use the restroom. So they say, yeah, down the hall to the left. There's a security problem right there. They caught him at a desk doing something. He didn't quite get the thumb drive in, but they think that's what he was going to do. So, so they will send humans at you if they can. So that whole mixture of cyber and counterintelligence is where this is all going. It's already there. That mixture already exists. But people don't recognize it. I actually did a whole master's capstone on developing a counterintelligence perspective to deal with cybersecurity, and businesses aren't doing it because they think about the business email compromise, think about ransomware. But I mean, business email compromise is the number one financial loss year in, year out, 26 times more than ransomware. Ransomware gets all the news because it's sexy. Business email compromise, don't talk about. Number two is crimes against the elderly. romance scams, stuff like that. You never hear those, but billions of dollars per year.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, Mark and I have literally been meeting with CIOs, and somebody will walk by and say, "Oh, I wired that vendor the 74 grand that you told me to," and walk by, and the CIO will be like, "Hang on a minute," and go talk to them and be like, "What are you talking?" You hear them in the hallway. He's like, "I didn't tell you." Like, "Yeah, you did. You were talking at that event, at that convention. I got your email. Here, I'll show it to you on my phone." And it's like, "Hey, I'm at this event, about to go up. I forgot to see this vendor. Can you just do this? I'll circle back with you tomorrow." It's tomorrow, right? Like, and they're like, "That wasn't me." They're like, "That wasn't me." And the wire transfer went and everything else. It's really persuasive. I mean, it's not the Nigerian princes offering us millions of dollars anymore.
Right.
And there's a guy, there's a researcher out of Rochester named Arun Vishwanath. He has a book called The Weakest Link.
That's a good one.
It deals with it talks about how social engineering has been around since a long time. He goes in this whole thing. You know why the name thugs, how that came to be?
No.
It's in that book. I don't want to give it away. It's a good one.
There you go.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
That's awesome, man.
Well, this was good stuff.
Yeah, Darren, this is not going to be the last time we talk.
No.
I guarantee you that.
Yeah.
So we will talk again. Thank you so much. Great story, man.
Yeah,
great stories, great advice. So we really appreciate all you do. And for those who haven't checked it out, check out the Cyber Guy. You want to tell them where you publish your shows at?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's always an honor to talk about, things in my career that I'm proud of. If you look back, people say, "Why would you do wares?" At the time, it was great. At the time, it was great for me.
Yeah,
and I appreciate you having me on. So the Cyber Guy podcast is on, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, wherever you get your podcast, you can find it. Cyber is spelled CYBUR. It's a branding thing. BU for bureau. Cyber Guy. I also have another one called Get Cyber Smart. So for all of your family members and friends that always call you to say, "Why isn't my mouse working?" So that's
great.
7-minute things. It's like Cyber 101. So it'll give you different things about what cybercrime is, what cyber espionage, what's business email compromise, what's ransomware, how do I have a good password, all those kind of things. So it's quick listen.
That's fantastic. Well, Darren Mott, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks,
right.
Darren.
Have a great day. We'll talk to
you. You too.
Well, that wraps this up. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our episode. The next one is coming right up. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast and downloading on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for watching.